I'd like to show you how I would go about editing this image. I took several of these early in the morning. It was overcast, it was rather dark out. I had my camera on auto white balance, but all of the other settings were manual. My ISO was at 6400, and as you can see, it's clipping blacks on the left side of the histogram. I've already run this image through Topaz Denoise, so it's ready to start editing. And honestly, I almost trashed this because I did not like the background. I didn't like the color. I don't like the wood chips that the fox is on. But what I did like about it, after looking more closely, was her face. I thought her face was just so sweet, and she's looking right at me. So I thought it might be worth trying to edit. So here we go. Like I said, I've already run this through Denoise, so the first thing I'm going to do is crop it. And my initial thinking was to just crop it rather tightly like this. But I really don't want all of this on either side of her. So I'm going to come up here to Settings. I get the drop-down menu and come down to Rotate Crop Aspect, and that turns it to a vertical. So it's still a little too much. There's too much extra background. So I think I'll take it to about there. And then I'll click back on the cropping tool and it will keep my crop. So the first thing I think, or the next thing I want to do is go here to the masking tool, and I will select subject. And that selects her pretty well, except that it added some background here and left off part of her leg over here. So what I'm going to do is come up here to the mask and subtract with a brush. And I'm going to keep that feathering fairly wide, fairly broad, and click on Auto Mask so that hopefully it will be able to, Lightroom will be able to see the boundary that I'm going for. So it has a nice margin and hopefully will keep her feathery fur parts, but get rid of the dark part in the background that I don't really want as part of my mask. So that looks a little better. We'll leave it at that for now. The other thing I want to do is add in her leg down here. It did not include that white fur on her leg. So I'm going to add, again, another brush on that leg. And this time I'm going to increase the exposure just a tiny bit and show the overlay. And we'll add that fur back in. Now I'll take the overlay off and see if that's too bright, and maybe I'll just bring the exposure, probably just leave it at 0 because it's including the fur in the mask, and that's all we really need it to do for now. So as part of her that I've got selected, I want to increase the exposure just a little bit. She's kind of dark, so I'll increase it just a little bit, maybe 20, about 20, 21. And she looks the color does not look good to me. It looks very washed out. So I'm going to increase the warmth a little bit here on the temperature. And that should really help bring her fur back to a nice color. There seems to be kind of a green cast, so I'm going to increase the tint as well. And we'll go up, let's see what 15 looks like. I think that's okay. She doesn't look pink, she looks orange, so that's good. And then, let's see. We can add a little bit of clarity, not much. We don't really need much on her. So I feel like that looks good. She still looks a little green to me, but I don't want to go get too carried away with the tint slider. I think that does look better though. So now I'll come up here to where my mask is. I'll click on the 3 dots because I want to start working on the background. So I'll come down to duplicate and invert mask. Now if I just inverted the mask, it would keep all of my settings with the color and exposure and everything and apply it to the background. I don't want that. I want it to stay on the subject. So I'm just going to say duplicate and invert. That will keep all of those settings the way they are and give me a new mask on the background. And there we have it. And as you can see, all the settings are back to 0. So in the background, take this off so I can see what I'm doing. I want to get rid of all of this busyness back here. So I'm going to pull the exposure way down and the highlights down, the whites down, and maybe even a little bit more. Just really don't want any of that showing. Now, I could keep the wood chips in the mask or not. That's kind of a personal taste. I'm going to keep them in because I don't think they add a lot to the picture. What I want the viewer to look at is her face. She's got the sweetest face. So let's see. We're going to keep that, I think, as it is. Maybe bring that down a little more with the highlights and the whites, just to kind of get rid of that blue banding. But we'll work on that in just a little bit. So the next thing I want to do is, because she has such beautiful light on the left of her, I want to enhance that. So I'm going to create a new mask, and that is going to be a linear gradient. I'm going to start from the side over here and pull it across. And I don't really want it to be past her nose much. I want it to kind of blend like that. And so since I'm wanting to brighten up her fur, I'll come down to the exposure slider and increase that, watching for any clipping or highlight warnings is more accurate. So that's pretty good. I'll leave that there, but I don't want that on the background. I just worked to get that dark and now I've lightened it. So what I'm going to do here is on my mask 2, which I can label side light, so we know what we're doing. Go to the 3 dots and come down here, intersect mask with select subject. So I want the mask on the subject. So now it shows the mask is only on her, although it did not bring in that foot, but I think it's okay because she's pretty bright right there. So I think that's all right. So we're going to leave that like that, but that's how you do the intersecting of the mask. Okay, so now let's take that off. I want to lighten and brighten her fur a little bit. She was playing in the mud apparently, or walking around in the rain and got muddy, so let's lighten that up a little bit with a brush. I'm going to increase the exposure just a little bit, highlights a little bit, whites a little bit, and maybe even the shadows just a little bit to bring that dirtiness up a little bit. Now, one trick that you can do if you want the fur to look really white, which I don't really on this one, I want to leave it as she's been playing, getting in the mud and dirt, so we want to leave it like that. But what you can do is, if you want to make a white whiter, use blue. So we could go to the temperature and add some blue. I don't know if it'll really show on this. There it kind of is starting, but let's leave it at 0 for now. That looks pretty good. Next thing I want to do is work on her eyes. So I'll create a new mask with a brush, and I do have a preset for eye enhance. I think Lightroom comes with iris enhance, but I don't want that. I want eye enhance. That's one that I created for myself, and the blacks will probably be too dark, but we can adjust it as we go. But if we look at what the slider does, it's got exposure, plus contrast, plus highlights, plus shadows, plus whites, but negative black, so darker black. So it really does increase the contrast. So let's take a look at her eyes here and apply this as is. And you can see the black is clipping there, and it probably will over here as well, but we'll take care of that. What I want is for her irises to pop just a little bit. So I'm going to come back to my brush settings and double click on blacks to remove that and put the slider to 0. That takes care of the clipping. And her eyes look a lot better. Here is the after, and here's the before without. So you can see how she's kind of dull looking before all of those modifications that we made. Okay, let's go back to full. I feel like maybe she's a little bit light because it was quite dark when we were there. So I'm going to get out of this masking tool just by clicking on the circle here on the far right. And I'm going to bring the exposure down just a little bit and see what happens. Because I want it to look dramatic. And I think that's looking better. Now, this blue banding I was talking about earlier, we're going to come down here to Color Mixer, to blue, and we are going to darken that. And see how that just really... It's very faint, and I don't care if we see it a little bit, but I don't want it to be distracting. So now that I've made these adjustments, we need to go back up and look at the histogram. We've got some clipping, and we've got plenty of room over here on the right side. So we're going to increase highlights just a little bit, and that will brighten her, and whites just a little bit. So the whites are more overall, whereas the highlights are more where the highlights are, where the brightest parts are. And I like this. I think that looks pretty good. We might even go a little darker and just see how that looks. We're starting to clip in the background, so let's move that back up. Now if you can see on the histogram here, there is clipping, and if you want to see where that clipping is, if you can't see it on my screen, it's right in here. So if I pull the blacks way down, you can see where it is. It's in the background mostly, a little bit on her nose, but as I pull it up, it's not on her. So I'm not so worried about the background clipping, so we'll leave it right there. So let's take a look at our before and after. This is where we started, and this is where we ended up. So an image that was going to go in the trash bin actually looks pretty good. And I might, with this final edit, I might go in and get rid of these sticks that are kind of poking up in front of her using the healing tool or the remove tool. The other thing I wanted to look at is this little spot on her nose. Is that dirt, or is that something we want to remove? It looks like maybe a dirt spot. So let's go ahead and we're gonna just clone that out. So I clicked on the middle clone tool, and I believe I have it on heal, and so we'll just click on that and then click on the little bandage again, and that to me is so much better. So there we are. Down here. So if we wanted to do this, we would click on the remove tool and click on the AI generated tool, and then set your size. That's way too big. We don't need it that big. I'm trying to get it to a spot where you can see what size it is. So we don't need it that big. We'll bring it down, and then you can just start going over the stick or whatever it is you want to remove. Highlights it, click remove, and then AI will do its thing and take that stick out and replace those pixels with like pixels, so you can't really tell. But you've got some other things going on here with the wood chips. I would just go to a regular clone tool and maybe just clone that white out and see how that looks. And you can take it from there. So I hope that gives you some ideas of what you can do and how to use that intersecting mask. And if you have any questions, please email me or contact me. Let me know what your questions are. I'm happy to answer. So good luck.